Welcome to this module about cultural heritage management, an important aspect of a social management system. I'm Dr. Sarah Holcomb, Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Social Responsibility in Mining within the Sustainable Minerals Institute at the University of Queensland. Before I begin this module, I might situate cultural heritage management as a value proposition within the broader context of a mining operation and its business practice. When to focus on cultural heritage? Respect for cultural heritage is particularly important where resource extraction occurs on the territories of traditional land-connected peoples, notably Indigenous peoples, where there are prior long-term residents in the region of the mine and where cultural rights are protected by law. Nevertheless, IFC Performance Standard 8, Cultural Heritage, supports a consistent standard approach, regardless of whether or not the cultural heritage has been legally protected or previously disturbed. Respecting cultural heritage can contribute to gaining and maintaining a community acceptance of the operation, efficiency of operations, such that mining activity is not stalled by local protests or stoppages, and enhance legacy and reputation of the mining company. By the end of this module, you'll have an understanding of what constitutes cultural heritage, what constitutes a cultural heritage management plan or a CHIMP, the range of good practice international standards, including the IFC Performance Standard on Cultural Heritage and the ICOMOS standards, and commissioning and reporting requirements for CHM, both internal and external. What is cultural heritage? Cultural heritage is any aspect of a community's past and present that it holds to be important and pass on to future generations. It's usually grouped as the tangible, the stones and bones, and the intangible, knowledge, practices and traditions. The term stones and bones is used here advisedly, as this archaeological aspect of tangible cultural heritage is often the focus of CHM efforts, rather than one element of many. It's also important to be aware that culture is a verb, not a noun. This idea that culture is dynamic and not static also applies to the meanings given to tangible and immovable culture by oral cultural traditions. A group's identity is usually tied to their cultural heritage. As a result, managing this aspect of a company's operation is often one of the more complex areas, as deep emotions and attachments accrue to places that an operation may seek to change. Cultural heritage can broadly be categorised as places, objects and practices. Places can consist of archaeological sites and paleontological features, historic cities, ruins and marine heritage such as shipwrecks, urban landscapes, parks and gardens and industrial landscapes, museums and galleries of all kinds. Cultural heritage objects can include movable material culture such as paintings, vehicles, clothing and stone tools, archives and objects in libraries, literature and cinematographic heritage and the ideas they convey. Cultural practices can include oral traditions passed between generations, including kinship structures, languages, festive events and ritual traditions, traditional medicine, traditional ecological knowledge, otherwise known as TEK, and land management practices, music and song, culinary traditions, sports and games. Common cultural heritage places and objects include an area where artefacts are found, scarred or modified parts of the landscape such as trees and rocks, a campsite or fireplace, a burial site, associated with myths in Australia that might be dreaming stories and ancestors, a site associated with historical events, might be good or bad such as massacres, missions, rituals, ceremonies and natural disasters, a site associated with something of value such as bountiful hunting, seasonal produce or permanent water, and a site with religious or spiritual meaning. All of these tangible places and objects will have intangible knowledge and or practices associated with them. It will be important to recognise that not everyone in the community or group will have access to the same levels or types of cultural knowledge. So ensuring that a committee of respected knowledge holders is established as part of the CHM plan that works with local knowledge hierarchies, as well as a more inclusive group, will be important, as will be discussed in the CHM plan. Cultural Heritage Management Planning, or CHM, is a core activity in social performance management systems. The process of CHM involves all steps of the PDCA cycle. Though there are usually regulations in specific jurisdictions that must be followed as a minimum, a standard or consistent approach across all operations is good practice. An additional layer of CHM planning and activity applies when working with Indigenous and vulnerable peoples. So managing cultural heritage is a systematic process. In a social performance management system, it's relevant to all phases of the operation, as an integrated approach is good practice. The Rio Tinto Guide, Why Cultural Heritage Matters, published in 2011 and available online, also uses a four-stage guide. This encompasses 1. Know and understand, 2. Plan and implement, 3. Monitor, evaluate and improve, and 4. Report and communicate, all underpinned or interlinked by inclusive engagement. Cultural heritage management is the systematic process by which an operation accounts for the cultural heritage features and values within an operation's area of influence and then acts to reduce damage and or protect and enhance these features or values. Cultural practices, beliefs and traditions associated with places, objects and practices are always changing. Mining activities can contribute to and accelerate these changes both directly and indirectly. Impacts can be direct and immediate or indirect. By way of illustration, let's imagine that the mining operation has built a road that destroyed a stand of trees that was sacred to a local Indigenous group. This is a direct impact. The road into the region for this long-life mine also enabled more ready access to and from local Indigenous communities, putting pressure on the local language and intergenerational knowledge transfer, as more young people are moving out of the area to larger towns, as an indirect impact. Countering the potential desecration of such sites is managed for in the CHIMP by a cultural heritage survey with knowledge holders and site custodians, and subsequently designated exclusion zones from mine activity, while indirect impacts may be managed by developing cultural programs to address this potential loss of language and intergenerational knowledge transfer, if, after consultations, this is what people want. Each cultural heritage management plan should be relevant to the stage of mine life, so they're dynamic living documents. The first phase is to develop a baseline of cultural heritage. This stage will also require the development of a stakeholder engagement plan, and if there are Indigenous interests, then also a specialised Indigenous stakeholder plan. It's important that heritage stakeholders are included as early as possible before the activity of the project or site selection, as the location of the activity may need to be moved at that stage, following the good practice requirement of obtaining free, prior and informed consent, or FPIC. In the do phase of the plan, do, check and act cycle, you'd be implementing the CHIMP. This requires integrating the CHIMP into the operations procedures and systems. There may also be specific plans that are required as part of an environmental and social impact assessment or cultural heritage protocols with communities. This stage also requires developing a clear procedure for the identification, evaluation and management of the operations of cultural heritage. You'll need to ensure that all potential users, including geologists and project planners, are trained in the CHM requirements. You'll need to establish a ground disturbance permit system or cultural heritage zoning plan and include an overview of the operation's cultural heritage and employee inductions. This third phase of the PDCA cycle is the monitor and evaluate phase. To do this effectively, you need to develop appropriate targets and indicators to help measure activity and performance, reach agreements with local communities on the targets to ensure shared understanding of what will constitute evidence of progress against targets. You'll need to ensure that significant incidents are being reported and that the operation is attempting to address changes occurring to local cultural norms. You'll also need to ensure that direct and indirect impacts are being monitored. Though the PDCA framework does not necessarily include communication and reporting, this is an essential element of CHM. The outcomes of monitoring and evaluation provide the basis for reviewing and updating plans and systems and taking corrective action where required. In terms of reporting, there's both internal and external reporting. The internal reporting is important for guiding formal and informal decision making and ensuring that CHM is not siloed. The external reporting aids in transparency and ongoing dialogue. It may include local community sustainability reports. You'll need to ensure that reporting is done in a culturally sensitive way. It may be appropriate to develop an intellectual property protocol to ethically manage the use of local cultural IP, such as images and so on. Take a moment to read through what is typically included in a report to the community. I will only briefly discuss stakeholder engagement as there is a specific module on this. What I will reiterate in this context is that stakeholder engagement is an active, dynamic and continual process. Engagement in relation to cultural heritage is often embedded in local level agreements. Agreements may contain a program of cultural heritage clearance operations within time limits, the establishment of a specific cultural heritage community liaison group that meets at regular times, minimum numbers of local cultural heritage custodians to attend the clearances, rates of remuneration for local expertise, expectations for the running of cultural induction programs for new operations staff. These commitments need to be cross-referenced in the CHIMP. There are a range of national and international standards that should be drawn on. I won't read these all out, so take a moment to read the list on the screen. To avoid siloing cultural heritage management, social and environmental impact assessments should consider direct and indirect impacts to tangible and intangible cultural heritage. In summary, I'll reiterate the key points from this cultural heritage module. Developing a CHIMP is not an add-on, but an essential component of an operation, and it begins at the SIA stage. The CHIMP then needs to be integrated into the operation and updated like any other active component of the local operation. Respecting the prior rights and interests of Indigenous peoples is sound business practice. Recognise that a group's identity is usually tied to their cultural heritage. As a result, managing this aspect of a company's operation is often one of the more complex areas, as deep emotions and attachments accrue to places that an operation may seek to change.